welcome to episode 3 of When Animals Attack.
I'm Jen.
And I'm Nilo.
And we're here today to talk about gator attacks. We were actually planning on doing 2 shark episodes in a row. I think that's what we said last time, but decided to mix it up and save the second shark episode for a later date. We're also not in the studio today. We are using a different recorder, so if the sound quality is not totally consistent, we apologize in advance, and it should be back to normal next week. So, Nilo, have you ever seen a gator in the wild?
Luckily, no. Actually, no. I take that back. I did see a gator once.
Where?
In Louisiana.
Oh.
I saw its head very briefly. I was in Jean Lafitte National Park in Louisiana outside of New Orleans. And I was taking a nature walk and kept my eyes out, kept my eyes peeled because I knew that they were around. And I saw one. I saw one with its little nose, mouth, its eyes. I saw it. It's the only time, yeah.
That's, yeah. It's creepy when they're in the water. That's when they're the most dangerous.
Really?
Yeah, I'll say more about that later, but yeah, that's more than I've seen. I did see one gator in Florida, but I don't know if it even counts as being in the wild. It's this random gator that essentially lives or often hangs out right next to this biker bar called the Bayport Inn in Spring Hill, Florida. I went there with my mom, who lives in that area, and you can basically just stand out on the deck, and there's a sign that says "Don't feed the gator." Wow. They've named it Kitty, so it's but it's not a pet or anything, but it's in the gray area, so it definitely was not a scary experience because we were way up above it, you know. But
it's like the establishment's mascot.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was weird. Florida, though, right?
Yeah.
So, speaking of Florida, do you have some stories for us today?
I do. I have a couple different stories. The first one, I guess, since you brought up Florida, the Disney attack that happened a couple years ago. It was at Disney World in Orlando. And is that right? It's in Orlando, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a lagoon called the Seven Seas Lagoon. It's a man-made lagoon. Oh. And there were sightings of gators previously to this particular attack. And, staff, they were informed, and it was... it's a really sad thing that happened. A 2-year-old boy his name was Lane something, which I'll pull up. But yeah, he was playing in the sand and was making a little sandcastle or whatever, and the dad was nearby. And he heard a sudden splash, and then he saw his son. His head was in the gator's mouth.
Jesus.
That's what he saw that. No. God, no, I don't want to. So it's at Lane Graves. That was his name. Seven Seas Lagoon. That's where it happened.
That's so awful. Can you imagine? It's supposed to be the happiest place on earth. Bring your family there.
It's the most harrowing experience of your life
imaginable.
Yeah, it's a pretty sad story. He was dragged off and the body was discovered later. They informed the Disney Resort, and they killed 6 gators as a consequence.
Jesus.
Yeah, they weren't even sure which one it was that killed them, And then subsequently they set up a barrier, so that people don't.
They probably should have done.
Yeah, they put up signs, and the family ultimately decided not to sue them.
Really? Do you know if they settled?
Yeah. They didn't say if they settled or anything. Probably they came to some sort of agreement. You know. But yeah, so that happened, and that was a couple of years ago. And the other story I have is from also a couple of years ago, in Texas. And this man, his name is Tommy Woodward. He is, well, I mean, he's internet famous now because everyone knows what he said right before he got killed. He said, "F that gator." Because they, the bartender of the establishment where he was hanging out, because it was apparently near there, that's where he was, said, "Hey, like, you should be careful. There's been a huge gator sighting. You shouldn't go in the water." And then he did not, listen to her. And it
was a woman that he didn't listen to.
Yeah. I wonder about that too.
That.
Seriously. And he just, he hopped in the water, and like within seconds he was snatched up and dragged in and drowned, and his body was again discovered later. 28 years old, just, big ego.
What a waste.
Well, I don't know him, but...
No, I hear you. Like, I don't necessarily want to laugh at anyone's death, but at the same time, if your last words are "fuck that gator," and then you get eaten by a gator a minute later...
I mean, it was, like, seriously, like, a minute later. 1 minute.
Like, that's fine. That's Darwin Awards.
That's pretty special. It's a notable story, in my opinion.
Yes. That's a good one.
Yeah, so... gators, man, like, you can't infringe on their territory too much. I mean, you can be respected, you can respect them, and you should, because they can, have lethal force against you. But
I mean, they don't mess around.
No, not at all.
And they've been around since the dinosaurs,
Yeah, they are dinosaurs. They look like they're dinosaurs, They're the closest thing to dinosaurs, I think, that are around. That and maybe, like, rhinos.
At least, yeah, I mean, it depends on how you look at it, I guess, since now it's assumed that dinosaurs are most closely related to birds, but crocodiles are directly related to animals that were alive and that actually ate dinosaurs. So, well, let's give a little bit of background info to understand just how dangerous these guys are. So, alligators are crocodilians, and there are 22 known species of crocodilians. Half of them have been known to occasionally prey on or attack humans, but only 2 species actively seek out human prey, and the alligator's not one of them. So that would be the Nile crocodile and the saltwater Indo-Pacific crocodile, so we should definitely cover them at some point. But the American alligator is the only crocodilian to pose any real threat to humans in the U.S. So there are some crocodiles, I forget what they're called, that live in the same areas roughly as American alligators, but there's only one attack ever on record, so they're not known to be dangerous. Altogether, crocodilians kill more humans annually than any other known predator. That doesn't include snakes because, with the exception of pythons, which rarely attack humans, when snakes kill people, it's not to eat them. It's just because they're scared or something. So, crocodilians have roamed the earth for over 230 million years and have been witness to the extinctions of countless other species.
Wow.
Supercrocs, which really were a thing, not just an invention of the Sci-Fi Channel, were truly enormous. They were 45 feet long. That's
oh my God.
If you lined up like 8 of you or me in a row. Like, that's how long.
That's I don't want to think about that. That's
their skulls,
so scary.
I know. Just the skulls were 9 feet long.
Wow.
Like, their head was longer than us.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and they weighed 20,000 pounds and ate dinosaurs. So that's pretty epic.
They ate dinosaurs?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
So yeah, they survived the Great Extinction that killed off the dinosaurs, but as far as we know, there aren't actually supercrocs hiding anywhere. Crocodilian stomach acid is the most powerful digestive fluid of all known vertebrates. It's capable of breaking down bones, fur, and hair into usable proteins.
Dang.
So only metal, stones, and some plastics are immune to it. And when they're cut open, you'll sometimes find like jewelry, even guns, all sorts of trash kind of inside their stomachs.
Wow.
They're anaerobic, which means they're capable of incredibly fast or intense but short bursts of energy. They're not going to be able to chase you down on land, contrary to popular belief, but in the water they can move much quicker than humans without expending much energy at all. When submerged, they can slow their heart rates down to 4 beats a minute and close down various arteries on demand. So they can redirect the blood flow from their limbs, basically to just their hearts, their lungs, and their brains to stay alive for hours on end underwater. Wow. It's like metabolic hibernation. So, and actually of all species, the American alligators are best adapted for that. They can stay underwater for 6 hours at a time. So they tend to kill by drowning, and that's why I was saying, like, seeing one in the water is scarier, because that's a situation where if you had been in the water too, that would have been a very dangerous situation. You don't want to be anywhere near them in the water, and that's why most places in alligator territory, if we want to call it that, will have signs up saying don't go in the water, because it's just, it's not like with sharks where every so often one will get close enough to shore. It's like you should assume at all times that there could be a gator in that water. So with large prey like humans, they kill or try to kill by biting a body part. It could be an arm, it could be a torso, whatever, and going into what's called a death roll, designed to force the prey's head underwater to drown you. Or, sometimes that results in ripping off a body part that they'll just eat. In deep water, they kill very successfully because they just sort of pull prey down immediately. So when people die, that's often the situation. If they're not very small, children, it's that they were caught in deep water and the gator killed them almost instantly by drowning them. In shallower water, it's more difficult, and so that means victims will have a fighting chance, but it also means if they do die, it's probably a prolonged, painful experience.
Fun.
Yeah. So they have these unique motion detecting receptors along their lower jaws that allows them to essentially lie still. So the one you saw in the water might have been doing this. They just lie with their heads, just, a small part of them above water, so they look just like a log. It's like camouflage. And they wait for something to enter the water because their jaws have these motion detectors, so they can feel if something starts moving the water, even a very small amount, or if you were to step on its head accidentally. I'll save the story I have about this for a crocodile episode, because technically it was a crocodile that did it, but let's suffice to say, if you were standing on a crocodile's head, you'd think you might have enough time to move out of the way, but as soon as you lift your foot, it's like if you had been stepping on a mine and it just explodes as soon as you lift your foot. It just pops up and it'll bite you before you could possibly move away. So yeah, they're very dangerous. The force exerted by a 12-foot American alligator's clamped jaws is approximately 2,000 pounds per square inch. So if it were to bite you, that would be like having a 4-door sedan parked on whatever body part it had a hold of.
Jesus.
Despite all of this, since 1948, when Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission began tracking alligator attacks against humans in that state, there have been just over 400 attacks. So, what is that, 70 50 years almost. There have only been 400 attacks, and only 24 of those resulted in death. So that's not, it's much less than one per year in terms of death. So your odds of being killed by a gator are pretty minuscule, but when the attacks happen, they're pretty awful, as your stories have already illustrated.
Jumped right into this.
But I've got a couple more. So my stories this week are pretty short too, but they're older.
Some historic accounts.
Yeah, a little bit older anyway. So the first one is about a young boy in Palm City, Florida. On September 10th, 1978, 14-year-old Philip Rastrelli chose to take a shortcut across the Hidden River Canal. So I guess he was trying to get to his brother's girlfriend's parents' house. Still with me?
Gotcha.
Yeah, he was mowing their lawn or something. He was supposed to go over there. And to get over there, I think if they didn't use the canal shortcut, it would take like 10 times as long or something. So there was significant motivation, especially on a hot day, for doing that. So anyway, he was a strong swimmer. He'd done it many times before, and so he and his brother Mario Jr. went down to the water. Mario watched him jump in and then went back home. A few hours...
So he swam across?
Yeah.
Okay.
A few hours later, Mario Jr. used the same shortcut to visit his girlfriend. So it was his girlfriend's parents' house that Philip had been going to. So when Mario arrived, his girlfriend's parents asked why Philip hadn't shown up to mow the lawn. Mario had watched Philip jump into the canal on his way to their house, so he knew something was up. Within minutes, he and his father were in a boat searching the canal for any sign of young Philip, but they found nothing. The police and fire departments began an extensive search, but they too found nothing after several hours, and so when night fell, they decided to stop and resume the search the next day. Upon further investigation that day, so now we're on September 11th, they learned from a neighbor that he had seen a large male alligator under a dock in the canal on that morning when Philip had vanished. Another neighbor, even more ominously, called police to report vultures circling over an island near that dock. So when the police went to check it out, they found Philip's lifeless body, and it was less than a mile from where Mario Jr. had last seen his brother alive. They eventually trapped and killed a 12-foot gator, and the necropsy, which is basically the animal version of an autopsy, revealed pieces of Philip in its stomach, so they knew they had the right gator. So yeah, it had already begun to consume him his body by the time they found it. So yeah, that's a pretty rough story, and also shows how quickly, again, this could happen. Like your story of the moron who just said "fuck that gator," was gobbled up seconds later. The same thing here, because Mario watched his brother get in the canal. He was only in the water for a few seconds, and that's all it took.
Yeah.
So, I've got a slightly less depressing as fuck one. At least it's not about a kid. So, this one concerns a lecturer in Spanish at Rollins College named Rachael Lilienthal. The story begins on Orlando's Wekiva River. And this one's just a couple years ago, 2015, in the summer. So she was on summer break. And she and a friend were at a bar there, and her friend said, "Let's go swimming." And at first she was like, but then she went along with it. And once they were in there, the friend, I guess, decided to get out, but she was like, well, we're already in here, so she just decided to stay in the water on her own. So she swam maybe 300 meters and had already turned around to head back when something rough brushed against her. A moment later, the gator attacked, clamping down on her right arm. when she tried to hit it, it launched into a death roll, holding her underwater until her lungs were about to burst. But for whatever reason, maybe partly because the river was shallow in that spot, so it couldn't bring her all the way to the bottom, it was probably getting tired because they can only have those intense bursts of energy for brief periods before they need to rest. So it came back to the surface. So she was able to breathe for a bit, but it kept, she kept trying to hit it because she wanted it to let go of her, obviously, but every time she fought with it, it would start into a death roll again. So, she's just getting messed up by this gator, and it began trying to drag her toward the tall grasses near the shoreline. Just then, a couple in a nearby kayak, Krista Carlson and her boyfriend Casey Spencer, heard a woman screaming for help. So they paddled over, and at first they couldn't tell what was happening because the gator was underwater, so they couldn't see it. Krista said, "What's going on? Get in." And Rachael explained that she couldn't because a gator had her. So they tried to pull her into the kayak, but they were no match for said gator, who just held fast to her arm and wouldn't let go. So Casey tried hitting the gator's head with his paddle, but that really pissed it off. So it pulled her into an even more aggressive death roll. They didn't know what else to do to help her, so Casey kept hitting it with the paddle, and it kept thrashing her around, ripping off half of her bathing suit and turning the water red with her blood. Eventually, it ripped the other half of her bathing suit off, too. So there she was, naked, bleeding, and locked in a death match with an ancient killing machine. So she must have known that death was near. So Krista, in the kayak, yelled, "Hit him on the head," to her boyfriend. So Casey tried one more shot, and this time it was good. He hit the gator right between the eyes, and for whatever reason, that was enough for the gator to just give up on this whole situation, and so it began to swim away. So Rachael was elated, flooded with relief, and she looked down to assess the damage, and that's when she realized that her arm was not there anymore. She could see these little yellow tubes, which she later learned were nerves, and blood was just spurting everywhere. She looked at the gator and could actually see her arm in its mouth as it swam away with it. So it reminds me of your story, except, it's somewhat less awful than watching a gator swim away with your child in its mouth, but still, can you imagine, your body part that was there a second ago is in a gator's mouth.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So naturally she lost it. She began to panic, and they tried to tow her to shore as quickly as possible because this was still a really awful situation. She's losing a ton of blood. Her arteries are severed.
Yeah.
I guess Krista's parents were in a nearby kayak, and her mother happened to be a nurse, so she was trying to help and stop the bleeding. But they knew they had to get her out of the water. So when they got to shore, there was a dock, but it was several feet above the land, above the water. So, Rachael knew she couldn't pull herself up there with one arm and, so much blood missing from her body. Yeah. So, but again, she had a bit of luck mixed in with the awful because another stranger stepped in to help. This huge guy standing on the shore just single-handedly pulled her up by her good arm onto the dock. And he had a belt out and ready to go, and used it as a tourniquet, and someone else had already called 911. She wasn't out of the woods yet because she had lost a dangerous amount of blood, and alligators' mouths, really like any animal, but I think alligators' mouths are particularly disgustingly dirty.
Yeah.
So,
bacteria.
Yeah. So anytime there's an animal attack, I know I kind of glossed over that in previous episodes, but it's not that simple. You can still die from an infection, even if you survive everything else about it. But in the end, they were able to save her as well. And she later said that it was both physically and mentally excruciating to lose an arm in that way. But she survived largely thanks to that couple who so bravely came to her aid. So yeah, that's something that I love about most of these stories, when they end okay, it's often you see some of the best of human nature kind of coming out in these situations.
Bravery.
Yeah. It certainly doesn't always happen. You know, people also just run away or fail to help. But, you know, in the stories we've told so far, there's usually at least one person who puts themselves at risk to help someone else. So, yeah, she was also a really strong swimmer who had worked as a lifeguard, so she thinks that's part of why she survived.
That's awesome.
As well.
Yeah.
So, you know, combo of, like, luck of the shallow water and the strangers helping and the fact that she was just stronger. You know, if you're talking about a kid, they're just much smaller, much weaker.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. So, you know, but as we said about sharks and grizzlies, the gators weren't doing anything wrong. They're just doing what they're supposed to do, catch prey. And we're not their normal prey, but since we've destroyed most of their habitat, now, you know, they have a harder time catching prey, and we're around them more often, and they don't really have any way of distinguishing, you know, us from anything else. Often they bite without having any idea what they're biting at. You know, it's just they detect that motion in the water and they go for it. So I definitely don't want to blame the victims of these attacks at all, but I do want to say that we as a species need to respect these animals, and that means understanding that if we make the choice to enter their territory, we could wind up in their mouths. So fuck that gator is not a helpful attitude to have. Yeah, you know, don't hate the gator, hate the game. In this case, I think that game is maybe evolution, capitalism, whatever, but generally humanity's blatant disregard for anything that doesn't make our own lives easier in the short term, including, widespread destruction of alligator habitat. So that's what I got.
Yeah, we definitely need to respect their territory and respect what they can do, and also, like, you know, they're just designed to do what they're supposed to do, and that's it. You know, like, there isn't any two ways about it. Like, I think it's really interesting that, you know, that I don't want to launch into like a whole thing about like development and like capitalism and all that, but like, yeah, we're absolutely living in their areas. What are they supposed to do? You know, like, and we're so plentiful. Like, there's so many people. There's so many humans, and of course, we're gonna be victim to to alligator attacks or other attacks in general. You know, that's why I live in a city.
Yep. We've already decimated them anyway. You know, we almost killed them to extinction like we did to the grizzly bear in California. Yeah. But thanks to conservation policies, they've been making a comeback, and that means, there are more of them, and there are going to be more human encounters. But again, those statistics suggest that despite how scary and powerful they are, it's actually very rare that something like this happens. So, you know, as long as you are safe and smart and don't tempt fate too much, and again, not to blame the victims, we all do risky things sometimes, and most of us live to tell the tale, with the exception of the fuck that gator guy. Like, whatever, he literally asked for it. But the rest of them, it's not their fault either. It's the fault of just centuries of policies in this country and elsewhere in the world that have taught us to have a really problematic attitude with regard to wildlife, where we sort of see them as either cuddly pets, you know, and we'll get to the gator pet connection in a second, or as, you know, monsters that need to be eradicated, rather than just as this powerful, beautiful creature that's different from us that just should be able to live its life alongside us.
Yeah.
So, I can't remember where I first read about that second story, but you can see it brought to life in the Animal Planet show I Was Prey, which is actually pretty great for the most part. It's kind of hit or miss, but it's nowhere near as trashy as the average Animal Planet Animal Attack show. I can't even put my finger on it, but most of them, have you ever seen any of those shows where it's like super dramatic narration, like, and then the gator was on her body. You know, like that guy who's always narrating trailers or whatever. And, you know, it's rapid fire editing, and then everything's repeated 10 times in case you missed it because, you know, after the commercial break or whatever. It's just like, you know, terrible and looks really shitty. It was shot for like $100 budget, whatever. But this one actually has pretty high production values, and it's really simple and straightforward. Each episode is 2 people telling stories of having survived being prey, although technically not to be that professor or whatever, but they sometimes have stories that weren't involved. You know, the people weren't actually prey. Like, one guy gets attacked by a rattlesnake. Like, he stepped on the snake. He didn't, you know, wasn't trying to eat him. But anyway, people who survived animal attacks. And their stories are intercut, which annoys me because, again, it's just a tactic to keep people listening or watching. And it would be better storytelling if they just told one story.
Yeah.
You know, there.
Yes.
Whatever. Anyway, that aside, it's, you know, they don't repeat much, and there's no narration. It's just the people telling their own stories in their own words, and they have some home video footage, if relevant, and they will do, like, kind of classy nature footage recreations otherwise. So it's pretty good, and this was from the second episode, and it's intercut with that snake story. So, I don't know, it might freak you out, but...
Oh yeah, I'm scared.
But yeah, so if you want to watch a longer version of that, you can check that out. But my movie recommendation for this week is Alligator from 1980. Fun fact, it's actually the first film I can really remember watching, aside from Bambi. I think every kid from my generation has the traumatic memory of watching Bambi's mom die or whatever. Yeah. But other than that, I'm sure I saw child-appropriate stuff as well, but Alligator is one of my earliest cinematic memories. I remember watching it with my dad and possibly also my brother on TV in my living room. And for some reason, I had the idea for most of my life that it was called The Alligator That Ate New York. Not to date myself, but this was before the internet. And then I went to high school and college, and it was just the nascent internet. So there was no Netflix, no Hulu, no IMDb, and I didn't think to ask Jeeves about it or whatever. So I thought the movie was lost to history until I found a copy in the animal horror section of the now defunct Pleasant Street Video in Northampton, Mass. in the early 2000s. It was a really great video store, kind of like Cinephile here in LA. For one thing, because they actually had an animal horror section. But it was one of those rare and now nearly extinct breed of video stores run by true film nerds and specializing in cult, foreign, and obscure films. So, R.I.P. Yeah, it's great. So, nowadays we, of course, have much greater access to movies online, so... You know, I'm not trying to be a Luddite or anything, but anyway, I went looking for The Alligator That Ate New York and was sad to be unable to find it. I thought, you know, if they don't have this movie, it doesn't exist, right? I thought I had, like, completely manufactured the memory of it. But I kept looking at the section, and then I saw it. Alligator. So I was like, okay, the description was exactly what I remembered. I took home the VHS copy and watched it, and it was it. So it was kind of like recovering this little piece of myself. And I think way back then, at age 5 or 8 or however old I was when my fascination with animal attacks began. I think it holds up. Nilo just saw it with me a couple days ago. So what do you think? Does it hold up?
Does it hold up? I appreciated a lot of different things about it. Unlike more recent alligator or like animal attack movies, it actually has a narrative that's followable. Like it actually, things happen, and there's like a cop who you basically follow, who becomes obsessed with capturing this alligator and killing it. There is an element of like local politics, which is really interesting. The outfits are great.
Yes.
Like the way people look. And there are just so many men. It was dominated by men. The whole
one babe.
One babe. One like mega babe.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. But yeah, it was mostly about how men interact with each other when they're dealing with like a case.
Yeah.
And then, interspersed with like some really rad, alligator moments.
Yeah. Which are not CGI. It's all practical effects.
All practical effects, all like, camera maneuvers, like, like running up from behind.
Yeah.
A lot of that.
Yeah, a lot of gator cam.
A lot of gator cam. That was cool.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really fun to watch, actually.
Right? And there's some homoeroticism too that we were noticing.
That was intense, actually. There's
kind of a lot.
There's kind of a lot. I don't know. I mean, is that like a sign of the times?
I think so. I remember there being, especially in like Predator 2, I rewatched that recently and I was like, they are constantly talking about butt fucking.
Yeah.
Like, literally.
Oh, really?
Yes. Like, that exact word. It comes up repeatedly, and it's just sort of like, okay.
Yeah.
Put it away, guys.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if that's still, like, a socially normative thing that goes on between men these days, know? Really interesting. It was very starkly evident.
Yeah. I think, if queerness isn't going to be portrayed directly, then it's going to sneak out in subtext sometimes. And it happened a lot more, I think, in the 80s, like in that hard body period where it's like, whether it's Stallone or Schwarzenegger or whoever, shirtless, muscles rippling, that was the period where you were likely to see a lot of semi-naked men. So maybe, I don't know, maybe, who knows? Anyway, so... Yeah, it is a fun movie. Roger Ebert strongly disagrees, but I think it's pretty fun. It was written by John Sayles, so I think that probably helps. And it's based off an urban legend, which I don't know if you remember this, but growing up I remember hearing that people would buy baby alligators and realize like, oh shit, this is going to turn into a big alligator, and instead of rehoming it somehow, giving it to a zoo or whatever, they would flush it down the toilet, and the urban legend part was that then the gators would eat people, or at least attack them in the sewers under the city. So
a really great backstory.
Yeah, so that was like an actual urban legend, and we saw the little baby gator at the beginning. It's so cute. And then
Ramon.
Yes. And then this like mean dad, inexplicably, we don't get any reason, flushes him down the toilet, and it's this really harrowing scene where we're watching the poor baby gator struggling as it's getting flushed down, and this dramatic music. And did you notice they were watching it was this key moment. It was supposed to have happened in 1960, in the late 60s. Yeah, 1960. Yeah, at the DNC convention. Like the news they were listening to, it's like police shooting activists. So it was sort of, I don't know, making like vague political commentary, I think.
That's
if you've
so
got
interesting.
That intercut with the poor baby gator being flushed down the toilet. It's like the excesses of capitalism. Like our disposable culture, and like not being willing to reckon with the consequences of having this disposable culture.
And he was so aggressive about it.
Yeah.
He just like, he snatched up this little pet out of the cage, or the thing, the empty aquarium where his daughter was keeping it, and he just snatched it up and just like grabbed it, inexplicably and very angrily. and maybe, juxtaposed with that moment, I'm like, I don't know about that,
Yeah.
White male heteropatriarchy.
Right. And then the gator spends most of the movie just hunting down the white heteropatriarchy, right?
I was pretty pro-gator.
Yeah,
in the movie.
it was like eating its way to the top of the socioeconomic food chain too. Oh yeah, that moment where it like destroys the wedding industrial complex. It disrupts a wedding.
It was so great.
Wedding.
That was my favorite moment.
Yeah.
That was a pretty good one.
I'd forgotten that. So, yeah, I think it's a delight, and my strongest memory of it from childhood was just of severed body parts floating in the sewer waters. And there were a couple of moments like that, but it was not a huge part of the movie. It's just, like, what stood out to me.
Your little kid mind.
Yeah. And I can't find any evidence at all that there is an alternate title, so I have no idea why I thought it was called The Alligator That Ate New York. And I don't know if you noticed, but it wasn't even set in New York. It was set in Chicago. So I don't know if my
Sounds like
dad
a great sequel.
Yeah. It's weird because, like, the urban legend was usually set in New York, so maybe I just, like, conflated that. I don't know why they made it happen in Chicago, whatever. It's all a mystery, but it'll always be The Alligator That Ate New York to me. So I think that's the obvious choice if any of you listeners would like to see a gator movie, but I'm also going to recommend The Great Alligator. So kind of like The Last Shark, this is an Italian movie trying to kind of capitalize on the success of Jaws around the same time. But it actually came out the year before Alligator in 1979, so it beat us out in a way. Also similar to The Last Shark, it's got a great mixture of artistic inspirations and a truly schlocky narrative. So, we get to watch a giant animal eating up a bunch of rich people with luscious cinematography. What more could you want?
That sounds great.
It is. And in this case, the gator is actually a force of anti-colonialism. Because it's like these white people come into a jungle. It's kind of unspecified where it's supposed to happen. It was shot in Sri Lanka, and it looks like Southeast Asia, but the dialogue seems to suggest it's supposed to be set in Africa or maybe South America. But the Kuma people, like, they're called Kuma, and they're actually from Papua New Guinea, which is off the coast of Australia. So it's really, I have no idea where it's supposed to be set. Yeah, ambiguous. And unfortunately, it doesn't quite manage to avoid being offensive in its depiction of indigenous people, but the idea is these, like, wealthy venture capitalists come to this unspecified place and tear down the jungle with no regard for the natives, like, kind of seemingly forcing them into slave labor, at least a very exploitative labor situation, and no concern for the environment or anything, to build this enormous exclusive resort that only the wealthiest people could afford to visit. And then the gator is literally like an embodiment of a native god taking vengeance against these capitalists.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
So it's pretty great, except that, it does not manage to depict the indigenous people as anything other than superstitious, although, they're right, the god does exist. But they are very violent, kind of shockingly so at various moments. It kind of blew me away, honestly. It was like, there are a few scenes where it just really goes for it, like over-the-top carnage. It's like...
That won your heart.
It did, It's kind of like, it reminds, again, like The Last Shark, it reminds me of... Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, because it's like a plot of monsters that, eating the capitalists who are trying to take the land all for themselves and exploit it for their own gain, and also not shying away from ridiculous over-the-top violence, I guess. Orgies of violence. So if that's your thing, check that movie out on Amazon Prime right now. So... Nilo, do you have anything else you wanted to talk about or add?
I don't know. Not really. That's it, I think.
All right. So if you listeners at home, in your cars, wherever you might be, happen to have an animal attack story, we want to hear it. It doesn't have to be dramatic or life-threatening in any way. We just want some like real-world first-hand accounts to be mixed in, and we can read it for you if you're shy, or you could send us an audio file and we'll just stitch it in, or you could call in, we could Skype, you could come to the studio if you're local, however you want to do it.
Yeah.
We want to hear your stories. So send them to us at whenanimalsattackpod@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at whenanimalsattackpodcast, and on Twitter at animalattackpod. And on Instagram, you can see the pictures we'll be sharing. We've shared some for the last 2 episodes, and we'll share some more this time. So, until next time, stay safe out there.
And don't feed the gators.
Bye.
Bye, guys.